Okay,
Yeah.
welcome everybody to this webinar being put on by the Social Work Action Network International. Today's webinar is on a vitally important topic. It's on the present situation in Palestine and what social workers across the globe should be doing about this. Now, of course, the situation in Palestine is that a few weeks ago there was a ceasefire declared and the Israelis were meant to stop their attacks on Gaza. But of course, in the weeks that have passed, there have been several attacks on Gaza, and the cleansing of Palestinians around East Jerusalem and the expansion of settlements onto the West Bank has continued apace. So it's vitally important that as social workers, we think about our role in the Solidarity movement and what we can do internationally to raise the question of Palestine. So with us today, we have got three fantastically good speakers. Our first speaker will be Noor Shihad, and Noor comes from Tulkarm in the West Bank of Palestine. Our next speaker after Noor will be Barry Levine. Barry was one of the founder members of the Social Work Action Network and has been active in Palestine Solidarity movement from a Jewish perspective for a very long time. And our final speaker, very pleased to have with us today, Roshan Dadu from the South African BDS movement, and she is going to talk about BDS and about, particularly from a South African perspective, its roots and its connections with the anti-apartheid movement and that struggle against apartheid in South Africa. So each of our speakers will have about 8 to 10 minutes, and after they have spoken, we'll go around all three, and after that we'll have some time for some questions with each of them before they get time to sum up. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Noor. Delighted to have Noor with us from the West Bank today, and as I say, Noor will be speaking for about 10 minutes. Noor, over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Michael. First of all, thanks for Michael and for other friends to give me this chance to speaking about my situation in Palestine. Thank you so much. I want to start first of all about the last war in Gaza since last month. It make a lot of problems in Gaza. You know, the Zionism, they attacked the Gaza Strip by flights, and they destroyed everything. Now we decided in the Union of Social Workers in Palestine to send 50 social workers to Gaza to help the children and other people, to support them as a psychology and sociality in Gaza, to working with them. This project is not, each group will go stay 1 month in Gaza, and after that we change and send other people to Gaza to working with the people in Gaza, with children, with women, with adults, with teenagers, people, about what happened in Gaza, and we try to solve all the problems, psychology and sociality problems after the war. It happened with a lot of people. I have a lot of videos if you can. I don't want to see it now, but if you see this video, I sure you will be, maybe your heart will be cut if you see it. Children, how they will be outside from his houses when the Israelis they destroyed him. Some children they carry the flowers, they stay. These flowers stay in these houses. A lot of things it happens. Some people speaking, we need many years to be really comfortable people. A lot of people, we make interview with them in Gaza. Now I did the 5 project with my association in Gaza to working with the women. And in West Bank, it's same, but in different issues. We attacked by Israeli direct face-to-face in West Bank, actually in East Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, like this. In Sheikh Jarrah, they have a lot of problems because all the people under the pressure since 6-7 months. They thinking or they thoughting One day they will kick him out of his houses, and they carry a lot of psychological problems and sociality problems. But they have a lot of people now in East Jerusalem. They're working with these people and give him more support. In West Bank, they have same. The Israelis, they certificated a lot of lands, and they don't allow for a lot of farmers to use his land, to plant it, to work in his land, and it make a lot of sociality problems for these people. It will give him more poor people, and we need more working with them. They have a lot of projects now in Palestine to work with the Palestinian people, to support them by psychological projects, because we need more of that. And they have a project working with the prisoners, Palestinian people. They stay in the jail more than 10 years, and they release the new from the jail. They working with them to put him in good things with the Palestinian people after many years outside of the community. They want to damage him against in the Palestinian community with good thinking, with good things. In Palestine, the social workers, they have a hard job. Now I want to speaking about Palestinian things. The culture sociality in Palestine is different in Euro or in other countries. I think Michael, maybe you know that in Palestine the people is very difficult to come to the social workers and speaking about what they have of sociality problems. They shame for that. It's a history. It's a history, and we now trying to working to convince the Palestinian people it's better to come to the social workers, to work with social workers, because the social workers, they give more advising for these people how we can stay with a good life. It's a big problem. We stopped, not stopped, they put a lot of stones, small stones in the social workers way in Palestine. Actually, in the Palestinian villages, the habitat in the villages is very difficult, and it's not easy to working with these people as as social workers, because a lot of people, they prefer to hidden everything inside of them, not to speaking about what they happen. Now in the camp, we are trying in the Palestinian camps to working with the UNRWA. You know what mean UNRWA? They work in the United Nations, working in Palestinian camps. They have now in each camp, in the center of the camp, they have a social workers. They accept all the people who want to come to speaking about his problems, about what happened with them in the life, and he need more helping. I hope in closed years we can development the working of social workers more than in Palestine, and the Palestinian people, I hope they will change the idea of this bad culture to stop to working or to coming with the social workers. That's mean not all of Palestinian people, but the majority of the Palestinian people, they using this habitat. They not prefer to come to speaking about his problems or his difficulties in the life with social workers to help them. I hope we can solve that quickly in Palestine, and we can continue to working good with the Palestinian people closely. They have a big number of social workers in Palestine, many thousands social workers in Palestine. In each city, they have a union of social workers. In each city, they have a branches of the union social workers, and physically in Palestine. Each city they have a branch. In the branch they have a lot of members, and we have a lot of projects now. Like in Tulkarem now, we're working with the communication non-violence. We're working with the people to give him to how we can use the non-violence communication. I hope we can help. I hope we can continue to do that. It's difficult, but it's a good job. It's a good job. A lot of people, they try to do that. And at the end, I don't want to talk more. Now we make focus, I told you, on Gaza. Now we try all the time to register the social workers who like to go to Gaza to work with the people in Gaza. First group, they will leave West Bank in 15th of July to Gaza. They will stay 1 month. After that, they will come back to West Bank and they will go other 50 social workers to Gaza, because the situation in Gaza is very, very, very bad. The children's, a lot of children, they make now, they have a lot of problems in the school. Then a lot of them then are now out of the schools. Yeah.
Okay.
We need a lot of job with them in Gaza.
Okay.
And maybe I will send for you, Michael, what we can do specific in Gaza exactly about the job of the social workers in Gaza. Every report they come with me, I can send it for you to see how is working, how is going the work in Gaza.
Okay, Noor, thanks very much for that. That's, I think, useful in terms of the range of projects and the extent of social work in the West Bank. And maybe later on, it would be useful for us to think about what social workers around the world can do to support the projects going into Gaza at the present time. So what I'm going to do just now is introduce Barry, who's going to again speak for about 10 minutes. And I'll start off by asking Barry just to introduce himself as well to us all. So Barry, over to you.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak today. It's both a pleasure and a privilege to be speaking alongside yourself and Noor, particularly from the West Bank, where the challenges are huge, as you've just ably described, and Rashan as well from South Africa. So yeah, I mean, my own background, as I trained in social work in Scotland back in 1982, worked in social work for over 25 years in various different community capacities, and then was teaching social work at university for over 13 years or so. These days I'm kind of not teaching full-time, I'm teaching part-time occasionally, and I'm also chairing a human rights law centre. So the issues that we're discussing here actually are kind of, very pertinent to those kind of activities. The other sort of aspect of myself is that I'm involved in various different organisations. I was convener, for example, of an organisation called Scottish Jews for a Just Peace, which is a pro-Palestinian rights organisation, anti-occupation, and currently I'm a member of a British organisation called Natamad, which is an organisation of British Jews who are committed to opposing the occupation and changing attitudes within the British Jewish community and internationally. So the issues that I wanted to cover are kind of, there's a lot here. Maybe I want to focus a little bit more just on the kind of some of the issues which Noor touched on in relation to the particulars of the situation in East Jerusalem, for example, I think, which helped to illustrate some of the depth of the problems that underlie the occupation. Because people talk about occupation quite a lot, but actually the specifics of that I think are very, very important. And there's been a lot of I mean, particularly there was a report just recently by B'Tselem, for example, which talked about Israel having a system of apartheid, and actually using that word for the first time, which actually I think changes the game in some respects, and going through some of the issues there. The other aspect I'll touch on is some of the I think the interesting grassroots initiatives which are in place to try and challenge the occupation both inside Israel-Palestine and outside of Israel-Palestine, particularly amongst Jewish communities. And I know that Roshan will be speaking about the South African experience later, which would be really interesting to compare and contrast to, and happy to answer questions on specifics, Michael, as well, which you think it would be helpful to do. So just thinking a little bit about the recent events, have been horrific, and I think Noor has illustrated that, and I think it's fantastic what the Palestinian Union of Social Workers are doing in providing material, physical support to Gaza. And there's, as you say, we'll come back later on to talk about some of the practical suggestions that we can maybe think about in building building solidarity. But the issues, Noor mentioned Sheikh Jarrah, for example, in East Jerusalem. It's 54 years since the occupation of East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Gaza has been both an Israeli kind of territory and is now, sort of blockaded area in its own right, suffering from occupation in different and very, very extreme ways, as people know. Inside East Jerusalem, the Sheikh Jarrah situation, I think, is really, instructive. What's happening there is a process that's been going on since 1948. 1948, before then, the areas of East Jerusalem were controlled by Jordan. During the war in 1948, Israel took over West Jerusalem. In 1967, occupied East Jerusalem and annexed areas there. And there's been a process since then of trying to, as B'Tselem talks about, Judaize the areas of East Jerusalem. And that is one element, I think, of the occupation, which is four kind of lots of main planks to it. It tries to combine the geographical element, the use of law and space and place to really kind of end up with the kind of situation we have now, which is completely iniquitous, of two different systems for two different people, essentially across the country. So, for example, in 1950, Israel brought in a law which essentially made it impossible for Palestinians to reclaim any homes that they had been living in prior to 1948. Whereas for Israelis, the opposite is true. Actually, they can claim homes and land which they had lived in prior to 1948. So you have two different systems there which have grown up. Built upon that, in 2004, the area in Sheikh Jarrah, which is disputed, was the rights to this land were actually bought by an American settler organization, a Jewish settler organization based in America and Delaware, which, as far as I'm aware, has got no historic connections to Jerusalem from my history or geography has ever told me. So this group had bought the rights, and essentially what they're trying to do, with no connection to the area whatsoever, is to evict the families there to bring in Jewish settlers. And that's been going on since 2004, this process. So the court process that's been ongoing at the moment has been linked to that. So in the recent conflict, if you want to call it that, another way of describing it is a continuing war with periods of ceasefire rather than the other way around. In the recent, sort of upsurge of war that took place, you had the Sheikh Jarrah issue, which is kind of bubbling up and was meant to come to court. Back in 2009, for example, there had been non-violent demonstrations by both Palestinians and Israeli Jews, which had stopped and halted the evictions then. And actually, it was American. Then it was American, sort of pressure put on the Israelis to halt that. That's changed with Trump over the last number of years. So actually, that kind of protection had disappeared to some degree, if you want to call it that. And then on top of that, you had this horrible event in Israel called Israel Day, where extreme settler organizations organized to march through area of Jerusalem with the Israeli flag flying in a very provocative way, going through the old city, through the Muslim quarter, and basically it's where the videos that people have seen with shouts of death to Arabs and such like come from. It's horrific. I mean, the combination of all of that, plus what Israel was doing in relation to confining and stopping Muslims from the Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem from congregating at the Damascus Gate during Eid. The combination of all these things created the spark which led to the upsurge of war. And it's kind of these, you call them small elements, but actually all these elements combine together to create a very poisonous, toxic situation, which is, I think, indicative of some of the kind of the issues. And it's understandable within that people's resentment is extremely apparent. And for Palestinians, you know, who live under these different restrictions, it is, I think, completely iniquitous to have to suffer the different aspects of what are becoming clearer in terms of discriminatory sets of laws. So, for example, in relation to freedom of movement, that's one key area. Israeli Jews are able to move freely across the territories, whereas Palestinians are not. That, you know, in itself is one of the key areas. Political representation. Israeli Jews and Arabs inside Israel itself, within the old Green Line, are politically represented to some, you know, to varying degrees. But when you come to East Jerusalem, then you have a very different situation on the West Bank as well, where actually the 5 million Palestinians who live between East Jerusalem and the West Bank have got no political representation within the country, which actually provides which occupies them. The West Bank is under military control, has been under military control, military law, since for the last 50 or 54 years. That, you know, and the fragmentation of land, those kind of issues actually are the kind of components of this discriminatory and increasingly discriminatory system which is built up. So when we talk about occupation, we talk about the occupation of East Jerusalem in different, you know, in its different ways. We talk about the occupation of the West Bank and what that means for Palestinians there. We talk about the occupation in Gaza and what that means for Palestinians there. Again, different. But ultimately, what you have is this fragmentation of systems of law and arrangement and of law and representation, which basically provide this basis of discrimination. And that's probably where I want to you know, almost end just now. Maybe kind of the other bit that I was going to touch on was about some of the resistant movements. So, for example, one of the hopeful signs that have been seen recently, it was the organization Omdim B'Yachad, which people may be familiar with inside Israel. They wear purple t-shirts. An organization of Palestinians and Jews who actually stood out against the mob violence that took place within the Arab towns inside Israel. They held demonstrations, and they've been. I think it's, you know, there are elements of that which actually are important. I think from a social work perspective, to come back to that, we need to think about these initiatives, community initiatives, how we build capacity, how we support people to take initiatives like this. And there's much more which we could focus on, but maybe I'll stop there because I've just run over my 10 minutes.
Okay, Barry, thanks very much for that. Obviously, Barry and Noor are social workers as well as activists around Palestine rights, but one of the things that the Social Work Action Network has always made a big play of is that it's important for social workers to be embedded in social movements and social protest movements. And it's a really great honour for us on this webinar to have with us Roshan Dadu from South Africa and from the BDS movement in South Africa. Roshan, I'm just going to hand over to you, but it's a great pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks very much. Well, it's a great honour for me to be joining you today. I have no history or background in social work, but I'm in awe of the work that social workers do all around the world, particularly as globally there are increasing problems of poverty and inequality in South Africa particularly, but especially to hear from Noor in Palestine, because it's unimaginable to me the problems that people must be facing And as he's outlined, some of the challenges even for social workers to help people. But it's just extraordinary to hear that. And yeah, it's a great honor to be here. I mean, I was really just going to speak a bit about, having listened also to Barry, and that probably everyone today has seen those videos on social media of the houses being demolished, the people trying to stop the houses being demolished, and the brutality of the occupying forces in Silwan in East Jerusalem. But when you watch things like that, it's easy to sort of despair and think, what can we do so far away? How can we really be of help? And I think that, I really want to emphasize that BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, is a powerful weapon. And it's a weapon that we can wield all over the world. And I say that because, as you mentioned in the introduction, obviously it was a weapon that was very much part of the struggle that managed to liberate South Africa from apartheid. We used to speak about 4 pillars of struggle: the mass popular movement, the workers' struggle, the armed struggle, and international solidarity. And I think, we have to look on our role in the rest of the world, looking at what's going on in Palestine, and really try to see how we can sharpen our weapons of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And I think, just to very briefly, it's not something that we achieved in South Africa quickly. It was 1959 when Chief Albert Luthuli first made the call for the international community to boycott and try to isolate apartheid South Africa. It took more than 3 decades before South Africa reached the stage of having free and fair elections in 1994. So I think, it is a long struggle, and it is something that we have to commit as communities and as professionals and as sports people to taking up for the long haul. Although I think equally, at the moment, there does seem to be a bit of a turning point and a bit of a shift. And I think we do seem to have reached one of those moments where perhaps, hopefully, the narrative around Palestine is changing for the better, and where we do have the possibility to perhaps, to attack more on BDS issues. And I just wanted to say, there's sort of 2 aspects. One is the kind of people-to-people type of consumer boycotts, that something was very successfully done, but it took many, many years. In fact, in the UK, I grew up in the UK, my parents were in exile, and they were activists in the South African Communist Party and the ANC, and they were in exile in England. So, from a child, I remember standing outside supermarkets every Saturday, going in with stickers, sticking them on South African goods, talking to people, managers, demanding to speak to managers of shops, insisting that they remove the goods, packing trolleys with South African goods and then refusing to pay for them. All of those things, but I think we can still do today around the question of Palestine. And sadly, I was looking in the anti-apartheid movement archives online, and some of the stickers we used then, you could use exactly the same sticker with the same resonance to boycott Israeli produce now, which is sad in the sense that we hope that once we got rid of apartheid in South Africa, we would not have to be doing this again. But I think more than just being an example, and there being many sort of creative ways that the anti-apartheid movement around the world managed to inform people about what was going on in South Africa through the boycott campaign. There's equally the fact that, as Barry mentioned, the importance of calling out Israel as an apartheid state and Israeli actions as actions of an apartheid state. He mentioned B'Tselem, but it was also this year after that Human Rights Watch, another very supposedly well-respected human rights international global organization, that has produced that report that details in great detail the ways in which Israel can be considered in terms of the UN Convention against the crime of apartheid to be committing crimes of apartheid. And the implication of that is, if we can keep insisting on Israel being an apartheid state, the precedent that was set with the South African case in the UN around calling then for a special committee similar to the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid that was established for South Africa, means that we're in a stronger position to push our governments towards sanctions and towards the full economic sanctions, as well as an arms and military embargo. Of course, you know, it's not an easy thing to win, but I think using that way of approaching it, the way in which the UN definition of apartheid fits so well, sadly, with how Israel is behaving, you know, it is something, it is another sort of weapon in the arsenal of trying to push governments for sanctions, whilst as people, we can push people to boycotts, in consumer boycotts or sports boycotts, or in fact, the cultural and academic boycotts. And that was also what I wanted to mention, because I understand that there's a, that you have been fighting within the professional body of social workers to get a BDS motion passed. And I think that the academic boycott, again, in the case of South Africa, was one that was hugely successful. It's very impactful as well. So I wanted to just urge people to check the Palestinian academic boycott guidelines in the, I'm sure you all have, on the BNC website, because there is one clause, number 8, that specifically talks to professional bodies and the importance of trying to get Israel disaffiliated from those bodies. And we've had a few successes academic boycott-wise in South Africa. There was the University of Johannesburg, which was trying to resurrect an apartheid-era memorandum of understanding between that university and Ben Gurion University in Israel. That got pushed to a vote in the Senate. They had a secret ballot and it was voted against renewing that MOU. But it took a lot of hard work, obviously, on campuses and in the media, and making such a big fuss around it, dealing with all the issues the Zionists threw at us to try to derail this and to try to not equate Zionism with the way in which apartheid had, the apartheid practices in South Africa, although that MOU had been started during apartheid, but that was successfully won. The other one was slightly different, and it was around a conference at Stellenbosch University a couple of years ago. And the conference was specifically academic psychologists and also social workers, in fact, around historical trauma. And they had invited about 6 Israeli academics. And whilst the academic boycott doesn't target individuals, we felt that this conference, the reason for having those Israeli academics would be to normalize the situation in Israel and to consider it as historical trauma, when we've just heard Noor talking very briefly about the kind of situations people are facing and the psychological impact of those situations right now. So equating that with the South African historical trauma was just another attempt to normalize Israel and to try to sort of, if not act in complicity, then to create the impression that there was a sort of a post-conflict situation there, which is totally absurd. And we managed to, in that case, not to call for a boycott of the conference, because it was a conference that was worth having. It was an international conference. And obviously for South Africa, looking at these questions of historical trauma, extremely important. But to call for those academics from Israel to make a statement saying that they agreed with the essence of why there is a call for an academic boycott against Israel, which of course they didn't do. And in the end, they didn't turn up. So that was also a kind of different type of way in which maybe in academic contexts, rather than calling for a boycott when that might not be a sort of clear-cut issue, it's possible to still call on Israeli participants to make those kinds of statements, because we know that even though they may not be directly representing the institution that they come from, the complicity of the academic institutions in Israel is so thorough that though if they're not prepared to do that, then basically they are complicit. So that was just a few examples of the South African experience in terms of the sort of academic boycott. So I'll probably just end there. I don't know if there was, particular questions, then we can go into that afterwards. But thank you very much.
Okay, Roshan, thank you so much for that. So we now have got some time for some questions, but maybe just before I do that, for those that are watching, I assume that most people watching will be from social work backgrounds, and I want to just flesh out a little bit that something that Roshan said there. So if you realise that there are a number of international social work organisations, so Social Work Action Network International has got a clear position of supporting BDS. There's the International Federation of Social Work, and they have got a position of supporting BDS and have suspended the Israeli organisation from their network at this point in time. But there's also an organisation called the International Association of Schools of Social Work. So that's the network for university academics and university schools social work. And at the moment, they don't have a position, a BDS supporting position. And at their more recent conference, adopted a position of neutrality, even though in the past, SWAN have managed to get motions at their general meetings passed in support of Palestinian rights. So that's a little bit of the context of what Roshan was saying there, and the importance therefore of within social work thinking about those debates and thinking about our support for BDS and how we take that forward in our various social work organisations. So what I've got is I've got a couple of questions for each of our colleagues just to think about. And if you don't mind, I'm going to go to Barry first of all. And Barry, you know, one of the complaints or one of the arguments that's often raised, I think particularly in the UK, amongst in the way that that's taken hold in some sections of the Labour parties, the Social Democratic parties, the trade unions. It was also part of the argument around the International Association of Schools of Social Work, is that to be pro-Palestinian or to support BDS and not to defend the rights of Israel is in some senses anti-Semitic. So I wonder if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about the differences between Judaism and Zionism and what Zionism is and the way in which anti-Semitism as a label has been used in the present context. Nice easy question.
Easy question to start with, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a complex area which probably, you know, sort of requires a, you know, separate fuller discussion, to be honest, I think, to try and sort of explore it. But I mean, essentially, I mean, I'll preface this with saying that I think actually that there's a tendency to, I think when people talk about Zionism or Zionists, for example, I think there's a tendency to that become a bit homogenous as a term, and actually there is, you know, sort of a vast, you know, sort of differentiation between, you know, sort of how people think here. So, for example, historical political Zionism originated back in the 19th century in Europe, and very much as a response to extreme growth of anti-Semitism in Europe at the time, and it was seen as a way of Jews becoming, you know, sort of establishing safety. You know, so there was some kind of connection to you know, a return to Zion. You know, sort of the kind of essence of Zionism. You know, because Jews had a, you know, sort of historical roots in the region, clearly. So there's that kind of element to it, but it wasn't a religious movement as such. It was much more political movement. But there's always been different strands of people who would consider themselves Zionists in different ways. So, for example, and the whole issue of Israel, I think, then, and Zionism was not seen as the majority kind of response by European Jews really until after the Second World War, the impact of the Holocaust, essentially. It's that which drove people into, you know, sort of a different perspective. And in many respects, that happened because the Western countries were not prepared to take in the tens of thousands of Jewish refugees who were left, you know, languishing in camps in Europe. So there was, you know, this issue has kind of got a complex history. So people going to Israel at that point, for example, had no option. Call them Zionists if you wish, you know, so actually that isn't necessarily kind of, you know, sort of helpful. another example of this, and I'll come back to the kind of core question in a minute. I mean, so if you take the position in Britain, and probably in not just in Britain, but Britain's a reasonable example, the majority of Jews in Britain have some degree of connection to Israel, through family, through friends, through emotional connections, etc. And would probably actually call themselves Zionists, you know, sort of in that respect. But actually, there's obviously, at the same time, there's large numbers of them are incredibly critical of the actions of the Israeli state, of the occupation, etc. I mean, I mentioned before about the organisation Na'amod that I was at a kind of recent induction for just at the weekend just past. There was over, it was a good couple of hundred of people sort of who are kind of involved in that at the present time, mainly young people, all with very critical views about the occupation. You know, at the same time, they're not going to be renouncing Judaism as such. So actually, there is a distinction in Judaism as a religion. Zionism is very much a kind of political movement. If you look at Israel, then you get different scenarios as well. So the settler movements, you know, represented by, you know, so now people in the new coalition, Naftali Bennett, for example, the new prime minister in Israel, comes from that kind of sort of milieu. The American groups that I mentioned before are, you know, sort of like extreme, you know, sort of settler movements which base themselves upon sort of kind of like ethno-supremacism, I think is the best way to describe it, with some kind of, you know, religious base to what they're to their ideology, but based upon, you know, their views. So they are one grouping within Israel, but they're not the kind of they are not the dominant group. But they do comprise the largest number within the West Bank, the 600,000 settlers who are there. And that's very different again from religious Zionists. So for example, there are ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel who actually, many of them don't even agree with the, you know, formation of the state of Israel as it currently stands, but would have a religious perspective. So actually, I mean, I'm being, you know, so I'm not answering your question directly here, but actually what I am saying is that Zionism is a complex area. And I think we do need to be careful. And the reason I mention that is that it's probably why it has become, I think it has slipped into the kind of discourse about anti-Semitism as well, because when it is used in a way which is, you know, sort of throwing about, you know, sort of constructs such as, you know, sort of criticizing, you know, sort of, insults of people as Zionists and such like, then actually that can actually slip into becoming, you know, overtly anti-Semitic. And it has, I think, made it easier for some of the defenders of Israel and the uncritical defenders of Israel to try and use that kind of charge of arguing that any criticism of Israel or criticism of Zionism is anti-Semitic. I personally don't believe that. I think there is a distinction there, but it's a distinction that we do need to, I think, be careful about. And I think within social work, we, you know, sort of, we are careful with language and should be, I think, familiar with some of these kind of concepts. I don't know if that answers your question to some degree. You're muted.
Yes. So no, thanks very much, Barry. I think it's these are complex questions, and I think we've got a little bit of time to explore some of these issues. So thanks for expressing it that way and challenging us to think about some of those issues. I've also got a question for Roshan, and I suppose I just wanted to put that in the context a little bit of my history. So I suppose that I first came towards Palestine solidarity activity in the early 1980s. Israel had launched an attack on Lebanon, and in 1982 there was the siege of Beirut, and in the aftermath of that I was at Glasgow University, and we put a motion to twin Glasgow University with Bearside University at that time. And I just remember that in the front of the Scottish papers at that point, there was absolute horror that had happened. So you felt as if you were in a real minority movement of supporting Palestinian rights. But then every Saturday for the last 4 weeks, I have been in a Palestine demonstration in England, and I have witnessed the biggest Palestine demonstrations we've ever seen. So my question for you, you talked about the long-term movement around BDS, but I just wondered if you could reflect on the growth of the Palestine movement, not just in UK or South Africa, but internationally, and where do you think we might be at the present moment?
Thanks. Well, that's also a big question. I do think that, because I think the first demonstration for Palestine I went on was the Sabra and Shatila massacres. There was a demonstration in London, and then subsequently, as a student, was involved with both Anti-Apartheid in South Africa and with Palestine Solidarity. And even at that time, we did a lot of activities jointly, and we're trying to make those connections that I think increasingly, as I said, are becoming apparent to people, but even within Israel, at least human rights organizations. But I think there are certain times when there's a tipping point of solidarity movements. I think in the South African case also, when I remember as a child, the biggest demonstration against apartheid would be maybe 100 people walking through London. And I remember giving out leaflets that said, "Free Nelson Mandela and all political prisoners." And people would just say, who's he? Who's this? What's this all about? And then also a lot of racist swearing and stuff. But if you think then by the mid-80s, when the struggle in South Africa all picked up, we were, managing to get maybe 250,000 people, I think, at one point, with famous pop bands playing in Hyde Park at the end, and then those concerts for Mandela. So I think, you have to kind of keep going, even, as through all those difficult years when you really feel in a minority, where you feel that you're not managing to get the message across. But if you can keep going through those times, I think when there are moments in the struggle, and I think in Palestine, we're seeing one of those moments where people in Gaza, in the West Bank, within the 48 areas are demonstrating and supporting each other, as well as a time when Israel is going even more crazy than ever before, that there's a sort of a way in which people are no longer fooled by the Zionist Hasbara propaganda, where there's a sort of beginning of an opening to be able to say to people, this is not how you've been thinking it was. This is not how the BBC is presenting things. This is not a conflict of two equal sides. So, I think there are those moments in struggle where the international solidarity movement needs to be there, and you need to have kept going all that time in order to be there, so that when the struggle internally reaches those kind of moments, you are there to amplify that and to kind of increase and double the pressure on our governments, including the South African government, to take a stronger stance. But you're right, it's a lot of long, arduous, hard work, and at times it does feel very bleak. But I think, when there are those moments, then you can see the potential and you can see the connections. One thing that's happening at the moment is the Block the Boat campaign, where an Israeli state shipping company has been turned away from the port in Oakland, California. The ship then recently went on to other ports in the States, where the dock workers, combined with civil society, often Palestinian-led civil society movements in those towns, turned it away, all the way up to Prince Rupert. That same ship came through South Africa. And so we've now started working with them in Oakland in particular, to form a global Block the Boat campaign, to link the struggles, as has been done before with dock workers. As you remember, during the miners' strike in Britain, when the dock workers in Britain refused to unload South African coal that Thatcher was trying to ship in cheaply to undermine the British miners' strike. So I think, that again, there's sort of ways in which those struggles come back, and where that experience comes back to help over the years to again make those connections and to make the connections between Israel as a settler colonial state, apartheid South Africa as a settler colonial state, the role that workers can play globally in trying to challenge and chase ships and themselves implement an isolation of Israel and an economic blockade.
Thanks for that. Noor, I've got a question for you now. And so it's more about your 50 social workers going to Gaza, and I've lost Noor. Hi, are you there? So it's about your 50 social workers going to Gaza, Noor. And I wonder if you could maybe just tell us a little bit more about what those social workers will be doing, and whether there are things that social workers across the globe can do to support that. So what support can the social work community offer to those social workers going into Gaza to do that work?
First of all, Michael, this is the big challenge of the social workers in Palestine. It's the first time we take this decision to send the 50 social workers each month to Gaza. It's not easy, and you know the Israeli occupation, they have some workers, they don't allow for them to go to Gaza. Like me, I can't, so sorry, I can't, because no permit for me to enter to Israel and go to Gaza. It's not easy. It's a big challenge for the Palestinian social workers to do that. I hope it will be succeed and it will be okay. Until now, everything is not clear. They have names and we send them for the Palestinian Authority to do a permit for them. But it's not clear they can take a permit, or the Israeli occupation, they refuse some of people. All the project now with the Israeli hand. You know why? Because the borders and the permission. It's a problem. I hope all the people, they can take a permit and we can go, because in Gaza, the situation, I'm not going to Gaza, first of all, but I heard from a lot of people from Gaza. I have a good connection with many people in Gaza. I have a good connection with many social workers in Gaza. They describe the situation for me in Gaza. Everything is destroyed, not just the houses. The houses is not the problem, Michael. We can build it again, but the human, this is the problem. Many of children, they destroyed. You understand me what I mean destroyed? Not everything is not clear with these children. The hoping is destroyed. The future is destroyed. You want to give him more support. This is the big challenge for us to do it. And now I told you, we make focus for Gaza. Gaza is under the siege from 15 years. It's not easy for the people. They like in the zoo. But the zoo, we can go and see the animals inside it. But here in Gaza, we can't go. We can't go. It's not easy to go to see Gaza, or to stay in Gaza, or to work in Gaza. The occupation, it makes a lot of problems, a lot of siege for the people to do what they want, to improve the Palestinian people, to help the Palestinian people in Gaza. Everything, Michael, until now with the Israeli hand. I hope they can take a permit, and we started the project, and the social workers, they can go.
Okay. So just so that those that are watching, so Noor says that he can't get a permit. One of the reasons would be that any social worker who's ever been arrested or imprisoned by the Israelis for activities in in their communities. They simply wouldn't get a permit that would allow them to leave the West Bank and enter the Gaza Strip. So people like Noor, who have a history of involvement in the struggle, therefore can't go in that way. So one of the things that we're going to do at the end is that we are asking social workers across the globe and social work organisations to send messages of support to our Palestinian social work colleagues. So we will have email addresses at the end of the webinar. And also, if you can, at your trade union branches or at your SWAN branches or in your university branches or your student union branches, if you are involved in social work in any of those areas, is to send solidarity support to our Palestinian social work colleagues, financial support, any support that you can get in that way. So it's messages of support, and it's any financial or other assistance that you can send to our colleagues in the Palestinian Social Workers Union, and the details will be up at the end of the webinar. Actually, we've now been talking for an hour, which is I promised each of them that we would be no more than an hour. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go round again, and I'm just going to ask for a few final thoughts about where we should go now in terms of raising solidarity and our support as social workers, but as people also who are embedded in the social movements. So I haven't started with Roshan yet, so I'm going to go to Roshan first, then I'm going to go to Noor, then I'm going to go to Barry. So a couple of minutes in terms of summing up, and over to you, Roshan, first of all. And you're on mute.
Yeah.
Thanks. I think just to, keep doing what you're doing, try to pressure the other professional body to adopt a BDS resolution. I think I spoke a little bit about the academic boycott possibilities. Check out the PACB guidelines on the BNC website. Keep sending messages of solidarity and support as sister colleagues from around the world. And I think just remember that all of that helped us to win our freedom from apartheid. And I think we can do it again. I believe we can.
Thanks, Roshan. Noor, would you like to say last couple of things to your colleagues across the world, to social work colleagues across the world, about Palestine today and what's going on? So over to you, Noor.
What again, Michael? I want to hear.
So just, have you got a last couple of minutes, a last few things to say to social work colleagues across the world about what they should do to support our brothers and sisters in Palestine?
Okay, my request from all the international people or all the world, my request for you, Michael, for hopeful university in Liverpool, to give more experiences for the Palestinian social workers, like training, like that, to help them to improve the Palestinian social workers. It's important, and now the trauma is very important to work in it as a training, because a lot of children in Gaza with trauma now. Yeah, I think if you want to solidarity us now, is better thing to working with the social workers to improve them, to give him some trainings, to put him on the we need more experiences. This is I think that we need more experiences. I hope I trust the international people so much, because I am working with these people so much, and I know a lot of people, they want to help us. And this is my request, Michael. I am so sorry for my English. It's not so perfect, but this is what I can do. This is my English.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's perfectly understandable, and it's fantastic to have you with us. And so finally, if I could just go to Barry for the last couple of words from Barry.
Thanks. Yeah, and Noor, my Arabic is much worse than your English, I can assure you. So it was very clear what you were saying there, and I think a few points. I mean, one is, I think, just to kind of pick up on some of the other points as well. I mean, I think there has been just to talk about this, the broader sense again, there's been a shift in Israeli politics to the right, which I think is really worrying and extremely damaging, and that's reflected within elements of Israeli society as well. And there is a huge polarization there, which is thoroughly problematic, and it results in this array of discriminatory laws inside the occupied territories. It results in war against Gaza. It results in traumatized children, as you describe. And this is something which really has to stop. I agree with Roshan that there's been, I think, a tipping point in terms of the solidarity movement. I've never seen such big demonstrations in Glasgow either in relation to Palestine before. There's a new generation, I think, coming through, which is, I think, encouraging as well, and we need to support that in terms of moving forward. I think there are similarities and differences with the South African experience. I think in South Africa, the workers' movement, was a very strong pillar, which actually led to the kind of, the fall of apartheid. That workers' movement doesn't exist within the Palestine situation to anything like the same degree. The armed struggle is not going to succeed in the same way. Israel is a massively, militarized state. Sanctions and such like, and embargoes and weapons, absolutely, we need to press for that. I think international solidarity is the other pillar there, which we need to ensure, and I agree completely, we need to build international solidarity, how we can. So in terms of social work, I think there's a few things. I think what Michael was saying before, I completely agree with. I think we should be looking to, for example, for social work organizations or union branches to perhaps twin with unions of social workers in Palestine, raise money financially, raise solidarity messages. We need to take this back into our trade unions in the public sector here and elsewhere to gain support. I think solidarity action like the refusal to load shipping that Roshan mentioned, incredibly important acts of solidarity. We need to, I think, build on that. And I think fundamentally, it is about, I think, we should certainly support the NGOs which are working, so they're small within the kind of within Israel and Palestine itself. Organizations I've mentioned before, the Omdim B'Yachad, B'Tselem, Competence for Peace. There are many, many more. Gisha is another very
Competent for Peace, here.
Organization. Well, I think we could argue about their efficacy. However, there are organizations which are.
I am one who founded the Competent for Peace.
Oh, there you go. Okay, excellent, excellent. I was at a wonderful seminar they did recently, which I thought was one of the most powerful meetings I've been at. It was involved people from residents within Sheikh Jarrah and Israeli activists as well. So there are hopeful signs like that, but it's small, and I think that it's the external pressure that's going to be absolutely essential. Political pressure. We need to get the pressure, in our home countries, on our own government in the UK, in America, in South Africa, because fundamentally, when we think about it, Israel doesn't exist in a vacuum. Israel was very much a creation of initially British imperialism and fundamentally American imperialism. And I think from that perspective, we need to use the forces we have in our own countries to actually create the conditions which can change the political support for Israel. And ultimately, I think what we're aiming for is a situation where it's equal rights for all within Israel-Palestine, where everyone has freedom of movement, where the refugee issue and the right of return is available both to Palestinians particularly, and not just to Jews like myself, who can at the present time go and live in Israel without having had any kind of family connection there. It's things like that that we need to change fundamentally, so we can actually achieve this concept of universal human rights for all.
Okay, so it just rests on me now to thank each of our speakers this evening. So thanks very much to Noor, to Barry and to Roshan. And I just want to leave with a sort of drawing together of some of those suggestions. I'm really grateful for people for watching the webinar, but it is really important that we move from watching webinars into engaging ourselves in the movement for Palestine solidarity. And it's really important that we take that message in to our social work organisations across the globe. So first of all, if you are not a member, then please think about joining the Social Work Action Network International or one of the in one of our country-based organisations. That's very important. We want a bigger voice in social work so that we can raise solidarity, not just for Palestine, but refugee rights or broader campaigning issues that we are involved in. Secondly, as social workers, we've always argued within SWAN that we enrich our understandings of the world and we enrich our social work engagements by embedding ourselves in the social movements for change in all their diversity. So please also get involved in your local social movement activities and around campaigns for Palestine and for Palestine rights. But specifically, what we're going to end with today is a request, really, and that request is to take the question of Palestine solidarity into your social work organisation. So if you're a social work student, raise it at your university students' union. If you're a social work academic, raise it through your trade union organisation. If you're a social work academic, look also to see whether your department is affiliated to the International Association of Schools of Social Work, and if they are, to bring pressure on the IASSW to fall in line with SWAN and the International Federation and adopt a BDS position. And if you're a social work practitioner, then to take that into your workplace and into your trade union and to raise the question of affiliation to solidarity movements, of taking up BDS, and in particular, to think about the story that Noor has told us today about the Palestinian social workers from the West Bank who are going to be going into Gaza to deal with and work alongside those children who have been traumatized by the recent attacks. And so two things in particular there. First of all, to send the Palestinian Social Workers Union a message of support from your organisation, and the email address will be up at the end of the webinar. And secondly, to try and raise through your unions, through your organisations, through your social work, workplaces even, solidarity motions and financial support to help and support those social workers carrying out that desperately important work in Gaza at this present time. So thanks very much again to our speakers. Thanks very much for watching, and please go out, get involved, take to the streets and raise the banner of Palestinian solidarity within the social work professions. Thank you.